Okay, so I got a few different things to get to today. The Duchess of Sucksticks, Meghan Markle's. She doesn't want to be called Meghan Markle's anymore. She wants to be called Duchess of Sucksticks. So, you know, good times for her. We'll get into that in a bit. I don't think there's much political stuff, so that's nice to take a break. I'm going to cover the P Diddy thing a little bit based on, I don't know, some clips. But I want to talk about the left-right paradigm. And, the key thing to note in this, I want to talk about the left-right paradigm to do with religion. And so, anything that's prescribed, your belief system is prescribed and you're categorized, like if you're rich and white, you vote Republican. If you're poor and black, you vote Democrat. If you're gay, you vote Democrat. If you're Christian, you vote Republican. And the idea here is that they may not, the Republican Party doesn't do everything the Christians want them to do. And the Democratic Party doesn't do everything the gay people want them to do. It's just that the Democrats are pandering to gay people just like the Republicans are pandering to Christians, right? And so you have these two parties that really don't satisfy anybody. There's very few people who really are happy with their party voters. You have the people who are very, being a Democrat is what they are, right? Being a Republican is what you are. It's more, you're more into that than you are any of the other demographics. You identify more with your political parties, and so you love everything they do because you're a Democrat. You're like that's what you are. That's how you identify. You're a Republican. That's how you identify, right? But the way that they shape these things is that if you have certain sort of tendencies, you'll head one way, and if you have the opposite sort of tendencies, you'll head the other way. If you're a scientific person, you'll head towards science. If you're a religious person, you're a person that thinks about God, you have some spiritual tendencies, you'll head towards Christianity. And so this is, something that people have to break free from, that the options that they give you is all there is. And that's what you get to pick from, right? It's like you get a menu and the menu has two choices on it. And a third choice of I'll be an independent or I won't, do anything. But, the problem is that there's people who grow up in Christianity and they have spiritual tendencies. They have critical thinking skills and they realize the religion's bullshit. They realize the people in it are fake and are not really religious and not really into it. I mean, most people who are in a religion or a spiritual organization, they're only doing it part way. And I can speak from that in terms of what I've done the Sizemore system. The majority of people just aren't, all that into anything. And so, there's very few people who are very devoted Christians. Like the people who, what are they thinking about when they're at church? How often do they actually pray? How often do they read the Bible? There's a level of commitment that's just not there. And, people are a little bit Christian, but more it's just about their families and, what everybody does. It's social. There's people that join a religious group to be in a social situation. I mean, there's ways that religions will recruit people, just like every other demographic, will recruit people in social function. Well, social community will be part of the recruitment process, right? People are lonely, and they run into some Mormons or something, and they don't believe in the Mormon bullshit, but they like that there's people that they can talk to, a community. You go to these cults, and oftentimes they're very nice to you, right? You go, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're so great." In fact, there's a guy who I met maybe my third gathering in Sajmarg. He was one of the young people that were there. He was in his 20s, and I talked with this guy for a little bit. He quit and never came back. But he told me he went to a bunch of different things that were very culty. And what he liked about Sajmarg is people weren't all like slathering all over you and like trying to sell you something. In fact, people are often off-putting and, people are very unfriendly in Sajmarg comparatively. The Indians are very hospitable. But the boomer hippies were always nightmares, poor socially, a lot of introverts. And, you're not there to to recruit people. You don't get credit for recruiting people. And so, people could be friendly, in a small way, but not in some way like they're trying to sell you something, telling you're the greatest person ever, and, taking an interest in you. That just wasn't part of the Sizemore system, right? But people and especially America, that's a very binary country, you have to break free from, I got to be this or this. I got to be that, or I got to be left or right. I got to be Democrat or Republican. I got to be religious or spiritual or scientific. I got to be religious or be a person of science. Because, half the battle is won, more than half, 70% of the battle is won to indoctrinate you when they get you choosing between one or the other and make you think that you have to vote, for example. And so there's people who grow up in Christianity that like it in the beginning because it's a good thing to grow up in a religion, but then they're ready to become spiritual. And they might dabble in a bunch of new age bullshit things that, are pseudo spirituality, and they're more about, the new age Oprah Winfrey level. And it's not just Oprah Winfrey, but it's, that kind of stuff where there's crystals and there's this, some of the stuff's pretty cool. But most of it is about how you can use your spiritual aspect to make your life better, right? Living your best life. People who are foodies and very material-oriented, material-centered persons, they're very sensory stimulation. And it's exactly the opposite. When you become a spiritual person, your material life becomes something you sacrifice for your spiritual well-being, right? For your spiritual evolution. But for the people that don't look for something else besides Christianity, people who are dissatisfied with their connection to God based in their Christian religion, they usually say there is no God, right? My wife and I were listening to that Mormon girl who was, she left Mormonism and now is a liberal feminist atheist, right? And, it's like she's found another indoctrination. And she quotes a lot. She has good points about Mormonism, but she's horrible about everything else because she's, a feminist, right? And she often talks about things like, crazy shit in Mormonism. They have to do these rituals. We were listening to this thing about the heretic, and then we listened to another video of hers. And she said this stuff about how it made her really upset that she had to tell her husband and see her secret name, but he didn't have to tell her, and that she didn't get to anoint anybody, like women aren't given some of the privileges. And I'm like, well, the whole thing's fucking crazy and batshit crazy. Why are you upset that women get screwed over by not being able to do more fake shit than the men, right? I mean, you're making it sound like it's a feminist problem. It's a they disrespect women in Mormonism, sure. But the bigger problem is it's based in fucking lies, right? And so it's not about, well, you're getting screwed over as a woman. It's about everybody's doing it's getting screwed over. And women are getting screwed over a little bit more, but that's not the fucking point, right? And the point isn't that, all God is bad because you were in some bullshit religion. The religion is bad. God is there or not. Like, God is either there or God is not there. And so most people don't have the devotional, the talent, devotional commitment to go and be a spiritual person. It takes a lot to be on a spiritual path. And so, if you're dissatisfied with your religion, you have to do more. Like, if you were going to go into a real thing, more would be asked from you, right? Like every religion, you can find out how do you benefit, what in the religion do you do, what is prescribed by the religion so you can get into heaven, for example, or the afterlife thing, right? In Mormonism, to become a king or a queen of your own planet, what do you have to do? And it's a bunch of anointing and rituals in Mormonism. In Christianity, it's accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. It's kind of like you're making a proclamation or a pledge. But, on a moment-to-moment basis, if you did it that way, it'd be a little bit better for you. But even, both of those things are just wrong. It's bullshit. That's not how you get... And, you have to evolve spiritually. You're on a level now where you're stuck here on planet Earth. And you don't get to leave until you reach the stage called liberation, which is, beyond all the stuff that all these other religions tell you. The original, the place where the soul was discovered was ancient India. and there was this ancient yogic practices, and they understood that there was a stage called mukti that you could attain where you're free from your future your bondage to planet Earth, right? And so that would be, it's not really you're getting into heaven. It means you just don't have to come back here. You'll go, be in the etheric world without having to be dragged back into a physical body, which if you're enjoying your life isn't so bad, right? People are happy, are like, oh, I don't want to die. Even people who are miserable, I don't want to die because it's everything else that's an unknown. Death is an unknown, right? And so, like, if you complain about something, you then are it becomes your responsibility to take on more responsibility, right? Like you're given this very easy task: accept Jesus or do this anointing ritual, which pretty much isn't much. That the Mormon thing, you go in there and you don't know what's going to happen. Like it's supposed to be a complete secret, and so you go in there not knowing what you're going to get. Christianity, they don't give you a lot of framework of what what your tasks are, what your responsibility is in terms of getting into heaven. It's all on Jesus, right? You accepted Jesus, and now He's going to get you to heaven. And there's no sense of, well, that guy over there says he accepts Jesus, but he's banging a hooker right now, and he's got fucking cocaine on his mustache, right? And so he says he accepts Jesus, but does that count? Like, what do what can you do and what can you not do? Like, it's very unclear, right? Or if it's your deathbed, you can go sin and you can be a murderer. You can do all the worst types of things. You can break all the 10 commandments. And yet, on your deathbed, you renounce those things and you say, all right, I'm accepting Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And then you're in, right? So that's, and it's bullshit. It's not true. Right? So then when you start questioning that, you're like, all right, what do I really have to do? And the answer is always going to be more work, right? And so most people just be like, all right, religion's bullshit. They always find the lowest common denominator in religion, the worst passages in the Bible, Old Testament bullshit, and people will be like, well, this proves that God isn't real. No, it proves that your religion is full of shit, right? Doesn't prove anything about God. Religions have almost nothing to do with God at all. They have almost no relationship with God. People who are not religious, not aware of God, they're not, they don't think about one way or another, but they feel God inside of them. They feel God's love. They don't call it God. Like they have a lot more going on spiritually than the average person who's practicing a religion, right? And so, but within your system, okay, you want to be religious, you want to have get to God, be a Christian. Oh, you don't like Christianity? Well, be a Jew. Oh, you like that? Be a Muslim. Oh, you don't like that? Be a Hindu. Oh, you don't like that? Do some Oprah Winfrey New Age bullshit thing, right? And so these are your options, right? But you have more options. And, when somebody becomes a seer of the truth, and again, isn't like some, you get some merit badge for that, but you start being able to have your own way of perceiving reality outside of the system. You start developing your own lens. And as flawed as your lens might be, if you're doing it the right way, your lens will get refined as you get older and wiser, and you're able to see more. And the reason you're able to see more is that you're no longer connected to the system to tell you what your options are and what how to identify yourself and either be this or that. And you don't have to participate in the society. You feel like a bad person if you don't vote or if you don't go to church or these things, right? You're told what you're supposed to do to be a good person. This is what you got to do to be a good person. But then it's like, well, the people who are the most successful and the most power in our society are the worst fucking people. So who the hell are they to define what a good person is, right? Judgmental neighbors, gossiping fucking bitches, and morons and whatever, narcissists and sociopaths. They're going to tell me what it is to be a good person. And so, they're going to tell me what success is. Like, these are the things you have to start redefining for oneself. Like, what is success for me? What do I think success is? What are my goals? What do I think I'm here to do? What is my life's purpose? And our system does everything in its power for you not to find your true purpose. They say your purpose is to be rich and famous. They say your purpose is to, have accomplishments. It's have power, to have successful career, these things. Be a good mom. Well, yeah, sure. Every woman's supposed to be a good mom, but you got to have a career too. You can't be just a mom. So you have to define what's most important to you. I mean, most women, these liberal women, I did a whole video about this, just a mom. I just re-released it in the membership thing, I think. That just a mom is a whole thing because they can't be just a mom, even though being a mom is probably as hard a job, maybe the hardest job around, right? But you have to be a mom and successful in a career, and being a career woman is more important than being a mom. Certainly more important than being a dad. And so that's what society's telling you. You're a deadbeat piece of shit if don't have a good job or you're not making a lot of money. But what else is there, right? So what are the other definitions of success? Like, I call homeless people entrepreneurs. It's kind of kind of shitting on them in one way, but it's also praising them in another because they're biting out of the system, right? They're free from all the burdens that everyone else has. They don't have a nut, right? They have whatever. They don't have a home, they have rent to care about, and I mean, oftentimes cell phone, whatever they don't have, they have less of a burden. They don't have to come up with money every month to pay their cell phone bill, to pay for their rent, to pay for their car. They can live in a box. All their shit can fit in a grocery cart, and they can, I mean, all the things, right? And so there were some ways. I'm not saying everyone should become homeless. I'm saying, they are free from the bondage of the American system, the responsibilities that the American system. Again, oftentimes they're mentally ill. They have drug addiction, but they're just not fucking listening to what they're supposed to be or whatever. They have a certain level of freedom and a lack of responsibilities that's liberating for them, right? My wife and I were driving by. There's a couple homeless guys there, and I go, "Look at those two entrepreneurs." Right? It's weird, but it's like there's some of it's like like making. I always just mock people because it's what I do, but it's also truth in it, right? Like their choices. When we talk about mocking, it's about choices that you make. But if your choices are within a systemic framework, and the system is corrupt, then maybe the people who are doing the best are people who have removed themselves from the system the most, right? And so again, I mean, I'm not saying everyone should be homeless, but I'm saying it's an option. Like people look down on homeless people, but is it better to be homeless than be ordering people's deaths as a president or these so-called successful people that are corrupt and hurting people, and CEOs pumping chemicals into people, and medical pharmaceutical companies destroying people's lives with opiate addiction? Is the president of Pfizer somehow better than every homeless person, or is every homeless person a better person? At least they're not doing any damage, right? And so, to themselves and other people. I mean, maybe to some extent they are, who knows, right? But they don't have a footprint, right? They're not polluting as much. They're not, they don't have enough, whatever. You get the idea. And so, what I'm saying here is that people in the truth community, if you're a real truth seeker, you're not looking for some powerful organization, some institution to justify your existence and to define what you are and what success is for you and what your choices are. You have to, and again, read the ingredients that I talk about, how exhausting it is to read the ingredients. It's also like all this other stuff that I'm saying. It's way harder to think for yourself. And most people just don't want to, right? Most people, I'm taking poison. I know that polyunsaturated fats kill me. I know that my pharmaceutical drugs are side effects that are fucking me over. But I'm just, I'm not going to go out on my own. I'm just going to do what they tell me to do, right? I'm just going to eat what they tell me to eat and wear what they tell me to wear and, take the drugs that I'm supposed to take and, do the things they say because I don't want to think for myself. The guy, Cypher character who goes back into the Matrix because it's too fucking hard to be outside. And I get it. Like, I get that as a choice. I get that as a, where it's just so fucking hard to constantly be reading the ingredients, and when you know that you're being lied to on every possible level and you have to comb through the bullshit time and time again to figure out what the truth is, it's fucking exhausting, right? So much easier just to go with the flow. But the flow is taking you to the fucking hell, right? And so, and that also means your religion, because the thing's taking you in the wrong fucking direction, making promises that can't keep, and really, doing damage to you spiritually that you don't understand because you are, when you go to a religion that says you just have to do this one thing, and then you give up your your spiritual sovereignty, you're turning your soul over to us. It's a big fucking mistake on your part. You're turning your soul over to an ungodly, shitty, corrupt organization. And so, the effects are there for everyone to see. Anyways, just wanted to start off the video with that, and I'll put this also in the Journey series because it's, it's special. Anyways, let's get into the other stuff. Okay, so Meghan Markle's is one of the most, she's so self-conscious. Love with Meghan. Meghan's, and I wasn't aware that this happened. Nobody tipped me off to it, but I became aware of it today. And this is a part of her Netflix show. And this is what she says here.
Name. I don't think anyone in the world knows that Meghan Markle has eaten Jack in the Box.
Boom. Meghan Markle eats Jack in the Box.
It's so funny, too, that you keep saying Meghan Markle. I'm Sussex now.
And I'm Sussex now. And I'm Sucksticks now. And so that was a moment that was, I guess, featured in some highlights and went around. People are talking about it. But she wants to be known as the Duchess of Sucksticks, the Duke and Duchess of Sucksticks, which is probably my favorite nickname that I've made up for people. She doesn't want to be known as Meghan Markle's anymore. She wants to be known as the Duchess of Sucksticks. And so, even though they're not in England, she's not doing anything that a Duchess would do. The royal family is pissed off at her. Wish they could disown them. They wish they could disown Harry. But she still wants to be known as Sucksticks. And that's good for Meghan Markle's, right? She's just so self-conscious and what's that word? Superficial and whatever the word I'm missing here. Fake is a part of it. And also pretentious. She's the most pretentious person ever in the history of, modern day people. There's a lot of pretentious people, and she's she was self-conscious and superficial and pretentious, and then she married Prince Harry, right? And became the Duchess of Sucksticks. And that's just, that's so pretentious what she just did. And so it's all those things. But, she's got a new show. That's the other thing. It's with the title and the princess thing and the whole, living the dream. She's got her own, show here on Netflix. They gave her gobs of money, even though she's abhorrent, right? Same thing with Hilaria Baldwin, where she has wrecked Alec Baldwin's life and faked an accent and gave the dumbest excuses ever that it's because of ADHD and dyslexia that she randomly speaks in other accents, even though she's born in America and grew up as an American and vacationed in Spain and took Spanish as a secondary language. Somehow she has a Spanish accent because she's faking and created a persona or a character, maybe in part because she was so annoying, and she's just a very mousy girl with a high voice. And so, another pretentious person. But, for some reason she married Alec Baldwin. That's enough for her to get her own reality show and become a celebrity. And even though she's hijacked, appropriated a culture. And Meghan Markle, so you could say the same thing. And, it's just icky.
The ex-girlfriend of Sean Diddy Combs is back on the stand for a second day in the music mogul's criminal trial.
It's just so serious. Whose baby is she carrying?
Cassie Ventura shared shocking allegations of abuse during her testimony yesterday.
It doesn't make him look very human here.
And she also gave graphic details on the so-called freak-offs and then broke down in tears when asked about how she felt about the alleged events. Ventura
Freak
said
offs.
they made her feel disgusting.
They made us feel disgusting.
Humiliated. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all 5 charges, including sex trafficking.
And a quick note to our viewers right now, CNN's coverage of this trial. You'll see on the left side of your screen, you'll see information coming in from our reporters who are inside the courtroom. It will be updating throughout the show. That's because there is no video or audio recording allowed in federal courts.
That's fucking bullshit. Fucking bullshit. Like, that's the only reason you have a trial like this. Get a fucking camera in there. There's a time that I would have covered this every day. Every part of it. I would have dove into this thing. Because I have a master's degree in counseling, and I spent a large portion of my professional life as a counselor working in treatment centers with sex offenders. And my ex was someone who was, according to her story, sexually abused by her CEO father. He was a guy who was in charge of some, pretty, well-known company that if I said the name, you would say, oh yeah, I know what that, I've heard of that. And so, and I endured her victim consciousness and, all the things that she suffered because of that or whatever, it's hard to say with somebody who's manipulative and deceptive, but I lived that life and I did this professionally and I knew a ton about this, and people used to watch my videos because I could talk about this in a way that other people can because of understanding the assault cycle and all these things, and then human trafficking and, abuse and transforming abuse. I wrote a whole workbook on transforming abuse. But YouTube started to punish me for making videos about this. Jeffrey Epstein, the pizza stuff, all that kind of stuff. And I made more reasonable videos than a bunch of fucking morons who go out there and write put a bunch of bullshit QB stuff about Tom Hanks or whatever it is for clickbait, and just because, it felt right to them than actually knowing about such things, right? And, I just didn't want to talk about this stuff anymore. I mean, it's just so long you can deal with something that's so icky. And, in the celebrity culture, there's all this stuff. I mean, there's demonic shit on every level of the, it's a big ego thing. Your ego is always a potential to be a demon. And these people who are Hollywood, bound, I mean, sometimes they, maybe they get accused of things they didn't do, or the things that they throw one person under the bus. In this case, it's Puff Daddy. So it's hard to say about any of it, right? It just becomes another fake part of the show, the spectacle of it. I'm sure Sean Combs, there's some things that seem factual, or is this just the whole thing manufactured as a distraction and, the rest of it. But now the society's obviously imploding, and we're at the cusp of the breakdown of civilization. We're about to go over the cliff. All these details, Illuminati symbolism and videos and things I used to talk about, things that were, whatever symbolism they were putting in movies and TV shows, and celebrity culture and all the demonic aspects of that stuff. I think pretty much everyone knows that humanity has gone south, right? Anyways, let's see what else they have to say here.
Let's bring in CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig and former federal prosecutor Elise Adamson. Great to have you both here. So,
boom. What are you guys going to say?
Ventura is still testifying. This is her second day. Right now, she is talking about that Uber ride home after
the Uber or Super?
The video we've seen from the hotel where Diddy is seen pulling her, attacking her. Tell us about her testimony and why that video is so important.
Well, so this is more corroboration. This is more support that prosecutors are trying to build in to Cassie Ventura's testimony. Of course, the surveillance video of the hotel assault is the most important piece, but now we're seeing the prosecutors use some other pieces of evidence.
What pieces are those, bro?
Selfies, text messages, emails, things that were on Cassie Ventura's phone, because they want the jury to believe her unconditionally. And I want to make an important point here.
Yeah, they're not going to, because, she was with him because he was famous and rich. Like, wasn't she a performer? So I don't know what she is. I know almost nothing about this. But, we know why she was with P. Diddy and why she stayed with him, right? And what she was hoping to get out of it, maybe advancing her career, I mean, who knows what, right? Like people who go to Harvey Weinstein, why are they going to Harvey? Because he's such a great guy? I mean, he was a gatekeeper to Hollywood in these people's dreams, and they had to pay a price. And they were willing to prostitute themselves to pay that price. Jennifer Lawrence, some of these other people, she was all over Harvey Weinstein, grabbing him, flirting with him, touching him, whatever it was. You see these starlets, and all of a sudden they're famous. Wow, it's crazy. And so it's a two-part thing. Like, yeah, that you're being victimized, but you could just say no and walk away, right? Like all these evil fuckers that do this stuff to people. There's that creepy guy, forget his name, don't care. Big fat fuck that's just like some big fat pedophile. And he was in charge of making all these boy bands, right? Like there was a boy that came to that guy, and he was in charge of making NSYNC and that other whatever it was, right? Backstreet Boys, and he was in charge of Aaron Carter. And so I could see the guy's face and whatever. He's the guy they did a 60 Minutes piece on him, and some potential boy band guy said, "What can I do to become more famous?" And the guy came out and opened up his robe and said, "You figure it out," right? I mean, it's that kind of creepiness, right? So you have people who are just that creepy, but they become gatekeepers between something that you want. Fame, fortune, celebrity, right? There's all these agents and scummy people, disgusting people, and people who are willing to prostitute themselves to get on the other side of the gate, right? Get that, whatever it is. And so I think the guy's name was Doug. And so, I mean, that's...
The defense argument is that, yes, this was domestic violence, but it's not racketeering, it's not sex trafficking. But it's important to know, and I think prosecutors are going to argue this, those things are not mutually exclusive. It can be both. In fact,
it can be both. It just not all that doesn't mean it is.
One of the things prosecutors have to show is that there was force or coercion. And so that...
Ventura reviewed a binder of more than a dozen photos of escorts she and Combs hired for freak-offs over the years in different cities. They had their freak-offs. Like, I mean, we know this is Hollywood, and these people were all going to his parties and participating in this fucking demonic eyes wide shut bullshit or whatever he was doing. Freak-offs. Freak off. He's get a freak off.
That beating, if I was the prosecutor, I would argue, yeah, you bet it's domestic violence, but it also goes to the sex trafficking and racketeering.
Because the argument could be made that from the prosecution side is that was a form of coercion. That
exactly.
Perhaps she was afraid that she would get beaten up, and that is why she did some of these acts. And we should note, she talked about the selfies where she had a swollen lip and a black eye under her sunglasses. So clearly the prosecution is trying to draw that out. Wolf.
And it's interesting, Elise, because right now we're being told by our reporters who are inside the courtroom that Cassie Ventura reviewed a binder of more than a dozen photos.
I just read that. Go ahead. What do you got, Wolf?
That were shown, and clearly she was upset. She said she typically reached out to escorts to arrange these freak-offs because it was her job, and she felt she would be punished.
What's your job title? Freak-off enabler? What was exactly your job title?
If she didn't do that.
Yeah, that's incredibly important because remember, the defense opened on the fact that Ventura was a willing participant. That's their theory of the case, that she was Combs's lover and she wanted to be there. And so they had to grapple, the prosecution had to grapple with the fact that Ventura was the one that was arranging some of these freak-offs. I think
she was arranging freak-offs, so she was pimping out other girls for him, right? She was going like this. She was that woman from Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, right? She's Ghislaine Maxwell. She, was, and they can say, oh, she's scared of him, whatever the thing is. That could be true. I mean, certainly, if there's domestic violence, but she's saying it's her job, right? Well, then quit. Like, I mean, you could do different. Like, she would be considered an accomplice. They might give her immunity, but there's crimes that she's participating in here. Like Ghislaine Maxwell recruiting people for Harvey Weinstein.
Prosecution is doing a wonderful job explaining why that was. By framing this as a job instead of something that she wanted to do.
It was a job because it was just a job. She didn't want to participate in freak-offs. She didn't like the freak-offs.
It's clear that there perhaps was that coercion. And by tying it to that violence, as Ellie just said, the photos, the corroboration of the black eyes, shows that
the corroboration of black eyes. I mean, there's corroboration all over the fucking place. He corroborated all over her.
She didn't really have a choice. She was going to be punished if
she could be punished. She didn't. She had to arrange the freak-offs.
Didn't comply, and that's key.
And she she just testified under oath that when she paid these men to be in these so-called freak-offs, it was with Combs's money. That's what she's saying.
Yeah,
she's paying men to be in freak-offs.
I think the argument prosecutors are trying to make here is, it sounds a little strange, but the freak-offs are not about the sex, or at least the sex is not what's relevant to you, the jury. What's relevant is those.
In January, Combs sent Ventura a text that he wanted to have a proper freak-off, an FO. That's what an FO stands for, freak-off, where they didn't take ketamine. Ketamine.
Freak-offs show the element of coercion, as Elise was saying, and they show that there's some organization at play here. Remember, this is
these freak-offs were organized. Apparently, he liked dudes to do the freak-offs with.
Racketeering charge, the first charge here, and that means that there was some sort of organized enterprise that was committing multiple crimes. So prosecutors need to show this was more than whatever sexual proclivities may have been, felt here by Sean Combs. There was some organization here with respect to people and methods and payments, and I think that's what prosecutors are building on.
Boom, yes, they're delivering on the freak-offs. They're getting right for, like, you go for the juggler on the freak-offs. Lou Pearlman's that guy's name. Lou Pearlman, if you look him up, he was in charge, and they did like 60 Minutes or something. He did creepy fucking guy, right? But all these, there's a documentary called A Open Secret by this woman named Amy Berg that's worth watching. It doesn't have any of the big names. Remember Corey Feldman, he was trying to make turn a coin on Corey Haim's abuser, who he later said was Charlie Sheen. But there was, by that time he had just completely compromised any sense of his being trustworthy or having any integrity. He tried to do this, set up his own social media that blew up, and it became just people that hated him that were subscribing to it. And then he tried to sell off these secrets, and he was going to deliver this. He did a GoFundMe, and he wanted $2 million for protection and security and the money to make a documentary. It turned out to be a complete farce. But there's this woman, Amy Berg, that showed that there were these creeps, managers, kid managers, people who were, in the Hollywood mix that were gatekeepers between parents and their kids becoming childhood stars. And they were sexual abusers. And it was an open secret everybody knew about. It's a scumbag thing. Because if you have something people want, drug dealers, right? You have something that people are addicted to, or something where they'll give up something for it, right? And if you want something from people, like in this case, whatever sexual proclivities that Diddy had, right? If you have those, deviant tendencies, you put yourself in a position, if you're going fishing, you have to find a place where there are fish, right? And so if you're a creep, what do? Well, you become a Michael Jackson, right? Michael Jackson builds acts like a child, and he builds an amusement park, and he talks about how much he loves children and all that stuff, right? And then he goes, does this creepy shit. And so people will put themselves in a position where they have power, and they have they're a gatekeeper between something you want, and they have to pay a price to you. You see it over and over again. This is Sexual Abuse 101. And this is, and Diddy Combs is certainly a part of this. But this woman's an accomplice, if anything, right? Okay, so I asked the AI bot about his freak-offs. Based on information available and provided context, Sean Combs' freak-offs are described in the indictment and testimony related to his sex trafficking trial as elaborate and produced sex performances. These were orchestrated and directed by Combs. Narcotics were allegedly distributed to women to ensure obedience and compliance, involving multiple participants. Women were allegedly forced to have sex with male workers. He often electronically recorded these encounters, sometimes without women's knowledge, lasting for extended periods. These events sometimes lasted for hours or even days, followed by recovery after the freak-offs. Participants, including Sean Combs and the women, would sometimes receive IV fluids to recover from their physical exertion and the drug use. They had to unwind from the freak-offs. Used for coercion and control, Combs allegedly threatened to release the freak-off videos as blackmail to keep the women compliant. R&B singer Cassie Combs, she was a singer. Remember, she wanted to be famous. Ex-girlfriend testified in detail about being coerced into participating in the freak-offs, stating that she feared her career if she refused. She described the events as traumatic. Sometimes she had to be on drugs to disassociate from these horrible events. Okay, so my wife sent me this 14 books vanished from the Bible in 1684. They're called the Lost Books of the Apocryphy. Shakespeare quoted them, Newton studied them, then the church erased them. Here is the forgotten knowledge they didn't want you to read. You guys can go look into that yourselves in terms of what was in there. I'm going to read the AI. I'm going to switch over to a voiceover here and read the AI stuff about this, and then I want to talk about this. I've talked about this in terms of the Nag Samadhi text, the Gnostic Gospels, written by Mary Magdalene, possibly. Okay, let me read this from the AI about these apocrypha, whatever it is. Here we go. Just got to pull it back up. Searched it last night. The Lost Books of the Apocryphy. The term Lost Books of the Apocryphy is a bit misleading. The Apocryphy itself refers to a collection of books that are included in some versions of the Bible, like the Catholic and Orthodox Bibles, but are considered canonical, I guess, by most Protestants and Jews. They were truly lost in the sense of being completely unknown, but rather were excluded from the main scriptural canon by certain groups. However, the phrase Lost Books of the Apocryphy often refers to a specific publication, the Lost Books of the Bible and the Forgotten Books of Eden. This is a 19th century and early 20th century compilation of English translation of the various Old Testament and some New Testament writings. Meaning of the Apocryphy, the Greek word apocryphy originally meant hidden or secret. It later came to refer to a book of uncertain authorship or those not considered part of the main biblical canon. Those books were primarily written during the intertestamental period, roughly between 800 BCE and the 1st century CE, a time between the Old Testament and the New Testament. This was a significant period in Jewish history marked by Hellenistic influences and Maccabean revolt, which these books often reflect. Catholic and Orthodox Bibles include most of the Old Testament apocryphal books. These books are considered canonical and divinely inspired. Protestant Bibles generally exclude these books from the canon, though they are sometimes included in a separate section for historical or devotional reading, but are not considered scriptural authority for the doctrine. Jewish canon never included these books as part of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. Examples of the Old Testament apocryphal books: Tobit, Judah, and these other things. So there's one thing I should ask here, which is about reincarnation. Apparently they didn't make any references to it. And so the thing is that Christianity is a success because it's the most widely practiced religion, over 2 billion people and more than Islam. Its success and the fact that the rich countries, the countries of Europe and America, the countries that are white privileged countries, are the ones who have adopted this religion and this idea that material success must mean this is the best religion. That those people who are practicing Christianity are blessed. That's the way the Christians feel about it. And so that gives them some sense that it's the best religion, right? And, with all the religions, they have their issues. They all have their various problems that are like not giving you, one, accurate portrayal of what God really is. And two, the most important one is not giving you a method to connect to God, right? They don't have a valid method where you connect to God. Just a promise of an afterlife. Like there's nothing in, I was talking about the Mormon religion and the, those rituals that they do. Like they do these anointing things. And, they have the same thing in Hinduism and yogic practices where you go to a guru and they're supposed to perform some sort of action on you, some sort of, they might give you some practice like a mantra or something like this. But, most of them they have these rituals that are supposed to confer on you some blessing in the afterlife. And they don't fucking work because you haven't done shit to deserve them, right? You can't go and do something, dress up in some fucking, costume or whatever, go and eat some freaking god-awful wafer in the Catholic Church and go to confession. And I guess confession you're doing a little bit, but not anything that would constitute going into heaven, right? Like just because you go in there and you tell some guy, it depends on how real it's always based in how sincere you are in your practice. The best Catholic you can be still doesn't deliver you to heaven, right? As far as I know, there's a thing called the best Christian you are is called what Babaji referred to as salvation, which is 17 years between this birth and your next birth, where you can process and plan your next life, which is not a small thing. It'll help you have a better life. Having when a soul comes right back in, like dies in it immediately, is put in a baby, like is immediately creating a baby, within like no real time is lost. Then your life is not, is directed. And so, there's all of those things. But a quality system would give you a way, like a clear path and a practice that would help you connect to God. And you're going to do the practice the best of your whatever, maybe not the best of your ability. In the Sajmark system, you meditate, and you're meditating on the abstract idea of divine light in the heart, and which is, like a placeholder for God's love, right? Because it's really a feeling. Gives you a mental idea of what you're, it's light without luminosity. You're not looking for light. You're meditating on the supposition of divine light. But at some point, because meditation is not words and thoughts, it is focus. It's relaxing into something, right? It's like when you shoot a jump shot, you're supposed to keep your elbow in, you flick your wrist. The ball is supposed to be your hands coming forward. So your fingertips are moving forward through the ball, and it's creating the ball to rotate backwards, which is called backspin, which creates the best chance for the ball to go in if it doesn't go in cleanly. And so you flick your wrist, your elbow's supposed to be in. You have your hand that's guiding the ball, which you want to take off the ball at the right moment. And your shoulders are supposed to be square to the hoop. And you want to be shooting the ball as you're up, like you're jumping upwards, depending on how much you jump. The closer you are to the hoop, you don't need to jump really at all. And, the jump is important, when you release the ball. And so, and you're looking at a specific part of the hoop. But, like, you can make a basket blindfolded. So, like, you could take your eyes out of the equation. Or you could, not shoot the ball correctly. Like, you'd be off balance. But if you have some of the other elements. But at some point, the mechanical aspect of thinking about your jump shot has to go away, and there has to be a flow to it, right? And that's the same thing with meditation. Anything where you're gonna, do something. You make a great shot. You make a great pitch. You have a great comedy set. You play a great. You have a good concert as a musician. It's you practice and it's very mechanical. It's very, thought heavy. It's very, being like very controlled, and then you have to lose control. You have to let it go, and you have to surrender to something, and you have to drop into something. And, it's this feeling of love, right? You can hang out and get to know somebody, and then, over some period of time, love is there, and it's beyond your control. Love is, the element, the essence of God, and it's just there. You feel love in your heart for somebody. And sometimes the person could be the right, right on paper in every way, just perfect for you, but there's just no past life connection. There's no love between you. And so meditation, the Sajmark system, you have this idea of divine light in the heart, but it's supposed to eventually be a feeling. And you're praying to God, like you're submitting to God to help you with this connection, right? Forming this connection. And then there's a cleaning aspect where you do some cleaning yourself. You get these sittings from preceptors. But people don't do the practice. They wonder why they're not progressing, right? The third master, Sajmark, said, if you throw potatoes in the water, but you don't turn the stove on, they don't cook, right? You have raw potatoes. You have to, there's a process. You're boiling potatoes, right? You have a recipe, and there's if you want soft potatoes, you have to apply some heat to them. So there's a method that's given, right? The method of, whatever it is to connect to God. There's always like a third party involved, which is, Jesus and for Christians or whatever, the master of a system of, people, priests, reverends, these things, other people that are involved. And then like the Holy Spirit, right? Some kind of divine essence. But there has to be some sort of method, a connection to God, and then some progress in which you're doing things in your life that advance your spiritual journey. And so, you end up having to figure that out. Like each person has to like go in and figure out what they need to do and how they need to do it. And so that doesn't exist in religions, because as soon as you start doing that shit, you no longer need like the books. Like the books are reference, the books are good to get an understanding of a spiritual journey. You get a sort of an idea of what's going on, and then you have to have your own spiritual journey. You read about somebody else's spiritual journey, and you're like, okay, and I kind of understand what happened with this guy, and then or woman in some cases, and then you're like, all right, I'm gonna do the same thing. And actually, for women, it's much easier for them to feel God's love. It's just easier for them to meditate. They have better hearts because of being moms. And so there's problems with renunciation for women. There's problems with attachment. But either way, you have your spiritual journey, and then you have these things that you read about, and then you go through the same thing yourself, and you have your own pitfalls, and you have your own issues and things you have to overcome. And then at some point, if you do the practice the way it's supposed to be done, there's an outcome to the practice, whatever the spiritual practice is. There's a top end to the system, right? You think about all the systems, like there's different methods of playing chess, right? There's different systems that people embrace, and there's a top end to them. There's some that you can rise to a higher level, right? There's one of the, martial arts is better than the rest of them. You look at the various martial arts, and certainly one fits your body type and and you have a ceiling, like how far can you go? How close can you get to God, right? So, each system has a ceiling in terms of your ability to connect to the divinity within you. Unless there's one that just, keeps on growing because God is infinite and you're following God. And this system allows you to grow exponentially and infinitely in the spiritual sphere of activity. And religions don't have that. They don't want you to grow. They don't want you to be a spiritual person. They don't want you to connect to God directly. And so they make up some bullshit, things that you have to do that don't really work. And then they are very, like the Bible is like the centerpiece of Christianity. And yet they've left these books out, the Old Testament books. The Old Testament is horrible. The religion that religion that, where the Old Testament came from, the way that they think about God is you're not going to make any progress because it's a demon. Like if you think about how God is portrayed in the Old Testament, it's demonic. And so that half of the book should just never be read. Like it just should never be, the idea should never be placed in your mind that God is a narcissistic, vengeful piece of shit that, does things arbitrarily and sitting on some throne completely separate from you, and there's no God within you, and this whole thing. It's a bad religion. It's not even a religion. It's more like demon worship. And people who do that religion feel guilt all the time. They feel like a piece of shit, which also happens in the Christian tradition of being born a sinner. That's a way to keep you down, because you're never going to be a saint. You're never going to be somebody who has divinity, God within them. You're just always going to sin, you fucking sinner. Stop sinning, sinner. And then you just think of yourself as something gross and dirty, and so you can't move forward spiritually. I mean, they're horrible. Like, these are, bad ideas, right? The idea that you can sin because you have freedom of choice, but you also can make the right choice and be a saint, right? And most people make right choices and bad choices their whole life. But as you're doing a proper spiritual practice, as you move along, you start making the good choices more and more. You make the right choices more and more. And then, in terms of the cleaning process, which is also, every confession in the Catholic tradition, there's always these elements of, there's a cleansing, right? Has to be some ritualistic cleansing that doesn't work. In the Sajmark system, you're doing personal cleaning every day. And you go to these preceptors or gatherings and get deeper cleaning of anything that's blocking your path to connect to the divinity within you. And the cleaning is a substantial part of the system. And you have these various systems that will go about the cleaning aspect, because you have these samskaras, these impressions that block your ability to see reality and connect to God and divinity within you. And so these things have to be done by you. Like, you have to participate in them. You have to be willing participant in the cleaning process, and then actively working to connect to God and working on it, thinking about it, meditating, learning about it, reading about it, all these things, right? But like I said, Christianity has a book. The Old Testament sucks, and the New Testament doesn't have a method in it to connect to God. And so the religions don't give you those things because they don't want you to have them. They don't want you to be cleaned out. They don't want you to change. They don't want you to evolve. They don't want you to find the divinity within you. They don't want you to think about these things in a spiritual way. So they are the opposite of helping you connect with God. They are preventing it from happening, and then making you their slave and servant or whatever it is, right? Making you their cult follower. And then there are people who are standouts, who just are, they develop their own method to connect to God through, meditative prayer and whatever, through meditation. Jesus meditated, everybody meditates. That's how you connect to God. The right way of meditating, because everybody meditates one way or another, but meditating on God in some way. And those people connect to Jesus and God in a higher level. And then they become saints, and then they get killed and crushed because they're a threat to the power system, because, they understand that there's a better way to connect to God. And, when you just have a book, and this is a problem for Christians, but most Christians aren't really into their religion. They're into the idea that they're set in terms of heaven. They're all set. They're not gonna, they're all taken care of. They've accepted Jesus. They're going to heaven. And they dabble in church and maybe, read the Bible to whatever extent. And then they get offended when they hear something like I'm saying now, because that means that they're not all set, right? You're not taken care of. You don't have a retirement plan. You don't have a death plan. And so, this is the important piece, because that's what needs to happen. Like, you have to understand that there's no method. You've just been told this, whatever. I was talking about Joe Rogan, I think, in my last video, where he was talking about how, people accept the Big Bang Theory, but not Jesus' resurrection. Well, the issue is, why don't you accept other saints or other spiritual beings? If you think Jesus had a divine moment, why can't somebody else have it? Why is it just your guy, right? What you've been indoctrinated by your family and your culture. And so, people can go on a spiritual journey, and there's usually the same outcome, which there's a spiritual fall. And Jesus' journey wasn't some, his I mean, the things that he did in terms of miracles or whatever, in terms of what he's credited for, are very limited to what you can achieve on a spiritual. Like changing the material world through spiritual powers, like some kind of what's called miracles, happens in the first rung of your spiritual journey and shouldn't be done. Only if God orders you. It's not Jesus was showing off a little bit or whatever. You got some yogic powers. It's not some big deal. There's people who are like kind of like flim-flammy gurus who have big egos in India who can do shit. Like they can do these miracles, like they materialize things or some healing properties. But they can only be done in the right circumstances, right? And so, the whatever they credit Jesus with or not, walking on water and, Lazarus's resurrection and these other things, those aren't, he's not transforming somebody into a spiritual person. He's not, transmitting to them and elevating them up to another level. He's doing some parlor trick, right? It's not that I'm criticizing Jesus. I'm just saying that there's so much more available out there. There's so many more things. And the most profound thing you can do is to help someone achieve what you achieved. And Jesus was trying to do that, but he is working with, people. And he didn't have a solid method of training, of spiritual training. And he didn't have the ability for cleaning and transmission and some of these other things. So he couldn't elevate somebody else, right? And so, there's all these things that are missing, and people have no idea they're missing because they think they've got a complete deal. They have a complete, a gestalt or whatever it's called. It's like a whole, which is, psychological method. But it's not that. There's a lot of holes and things missing in the Christian religion and all religions because they do the exact opposite because they don't want you. The goal of the religion isn't for you to achieve sainthood and divinity. I mean, if you have saints, why wouldn't they say the goal should be every one of you guys is a saint, a real saint, not some bullshit saint. And it's not about serving the poor or doing some fucking bullshit acts of kindness, right? Like, the word bullshit that needs to be associated with religion. It's achieving something spiritually where you've elevated to a different level of consciousness and you pull other people up through your experience. And you're growing, and as you're growing, you're helping other people grow, and you're pulling people up instead of pulling them down, which is so often the case in human condition, where everybody's pulling each other down, and you're elevating their level of spiritual growth and things. And so this can be done with effort. Like everyone's just got to put some effort into it. Everybody can be better than they were when they were born. Everyone could get closer to God. It's just about how far you're going to go. But having a proper method, having a legitimate method and legitimate help, trainers, legitimate, whatever, guru teachers and things like this, legitimate literature, legitimate, all these things. Reading things about people's successful stories of growing into a saint. The goal isn't for you to say, oh, I'm a saint. The goal is for you to become one, right? And, that could happen for pretty much everybody. But nobody wants to work at that shit, right? Because it's just doing shit that you don't want to do. Like it's, sacrificing for other people, sacrificing for God, not necessarily for other people, but you do that, like you sacrifice for God and that becomes service for other people and the planet and being more disciplined and more, just better as a person, right? Like Joe Rogan says, like that thing in that quote that I played in my last video where he was saying about people can't believe in the resurrection. Mel Gibson was on with him and they talked a little bit about Christianity. But is Joe Rogan going to stop smoking pot and doing fucking, ayahuasca and whatever it is, right? Which he thinks is a method. I'm not, ragging on him. I'm just saying, like, if you believe in something, then you have to change. Like if you really believe that Jesus was resurrected, but then then you're buying into the biblical bullshit, the edited, misleading biblical bullshit, instead of having your own spiritual journey. Like what are you gonna do? Like what are you supposed to do, right? Well, how can you evolve as a soul and a person? What do you have to give up? Like what habits and attachments and things you have to give up that are holding you back, right? They're holding you down. I was around this guy, Master Chargy, the third master of the Sajmark system, and he was, on a complete different level as a person. And my, interactions where I talked to him, I was around him. He gave me sittings to make me a preceptor. I spent some time with him. I read his diaries were published in these books called In His Footsteps, and they were very good for me to read, and, the various things that the masters wrote, and, help me understand spiritual life, and especially having no training. Like in India and these other countries, everybody knows that divinity's within them, right? Namaste, the divinity within me bows before the divinity within you. What a beautiful thing, right? Pranams, they give those hands and they say namaste. It's a great greeting. It acknowledges that you have a soul. And, the idea of a soul in terms of modern history was discovered in ancient India. And they had this idea of the Atman, right? The soul, the Atman. It's a, great word for it. I mean, it's the best word, Sanskrit. And so the Atman and the soul is also a nice word. Like it also, there's a resonance. The words can have, words are vibrations. So the vibrations of some words are more, like swears are more aggressive and more gross and, things that are, whatever. But Atman's a beautiful word, so is soul. And this idea that you have a spiritual essence. And once you have that, you have to understand you came from somewhere else, so there's a past life and a future life. And that you have something to achieve here. And that you're obviously not moving forward if you're still here. If you've had many past lives and you're going to have many future lives, you're not winning the video game, right? There's something you're not achieving. You're caught up in the matrix, right? You're locked into the matrix and you're not evolving out of that. You're not changing, you're not growing. You're missing out on something. And so, a book isn't going to give you those things. Especially, a book wasn't even written by Jesus. Jesus had limited spiritual growth. He didn't reach the goal. He has more to go as a soul. I believe he might be even incarnated now and participating in this next phase of human evolution, because that's what happens. All souls come back and work towards this. Saints and higher developed souls work on themselves, but also help elevate people. And, the lowest level person is working to become spiritually conscious and have abstract thought and be able to connect to God in a higher level. Everybody should be working at this, and nobody is. But these saints and souls come back down. Jesus had, some good success in his life as Jesus, but the religion that he's left behind that, has been warped and twisted and, doesn't really have anything to do with him anymore. And his teachings have been warped. Books that he didn't write, that aren't completely accurate because they didn't come from the master itself, right? In the Sajmark system, there's a book called Tears and Laughter about Babaji. And it's a bunch of people who do this practice. Most of them I know or have met. And some of them I know, fairly well. And they wrote up these stories about their interactions with Babaji. And it's kind of interesting to read. I read it one time. But it is like the worst book because it's not written by a person in a higher level. Something written by a master is always going to be better than something written by a person who's just a novice and just starting off, right? Somebody who's written by the person themselves. A book written by Jesus would be better than a book written by his disciples. So it's flawed in that sense. The Old Testament's a piece of shit, so there's got to be something more. You have to search for something more. If your thing's Christianity and you can't try something else, you're not open to try something else, you're still indoctrinated with the fear of hell and the temptation of heaven, the idea of hell and heaven and these things, and you're not going to be able to break free from that. You could at least connect to Jesus directly and pray to him and have some sort of relationship, which some Christians do. And those Christians are just, the cream of the crop, right? Because they're having a spiritual experience that transcends the limitations that are given to you by the construct of the religion that doesn't want you to have direct connection to divinity. But anyways, I've just been focusing on this stuff because it's the most important. We've entered the time where, It doesn't matter about Illuminati celebrity bullshit or, Puffy or any of these things and Trump and the rest of it. There's a time where, the system is collapsing around us, and there's that. There's the material effects of that. But then there's the ever-growing need for people to evolve and become something more than that you are now. And that evolution is 100% spiritual. And other things go with it, but that's what needs to happen. And you have to throw off the indoctrination of the past, which most truthers don't want to look at their bullshit religion because, it's something that they don't want to. I mean, it's too painful for them, and it means that you have greater responsibility, and reading the ingredients becomes even more profound under those circumstances. Only spirituality will save this world. It's paramount, definitely pointing for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.